The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Marcus Williams adjusted his red ceremonial jacket for what felt like the 100th time. The gold buttons gleamed against the deep crimson fabric, each one polished to perfection. His black boots reflected the early light, and his tall bearskin hat sat perfectly straight on his head. To any observer, he looked like the picture of military precision, a member of the Queen's Guard who had everything under control. But, inside, Marcus felt anything but controlled. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his rifle, hoping no one would notice. 3 months ago, his younger sister Emma had been diagnosed with leukemia. She was only 16, the same age Marcus had been when he first dreamed of joining the Queen's Guard. Now, watching her fight for her life in a hospital bed while he stood motionless for hours at a time felt like the cruelest irony imaginable. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic about Emma's treatment, but the medical bills were piling up faster than his family could manage. His parents, both working 2 jobs each, were drowning in debt. Marcus sent most of his salary home, keeping only enough to survive in his small London flat. Some nights, he survived on nothing but tea and toast, but he never complained. Emma needed that money more than he needed a proper meal. Standing at attention outside Buckingham Palace, Marcus tried to push these thoughts away. The tourists were already gathering, cameras ready to capture the stoic faces of the guards. Children pointed and giggled, trying to make the guards smile or move. Parents posed for pictures beside these living statues in red. To them, the guards were just part of the show, part of the British tradition they had come to see. Marcus had mastered the art of looking straight ahead while seeing everything around him. He watched families laugh together, couples hold hands, and children run freely without a care in the world. Each happy family reminded him of what his own family was going through. He wondered if Emma was having a good day or if the chemotherapy was making her sick again. During his break, Marcus usually found a quiet corner to call home. Today was no different. He pulled out his old phone and dialed his mother's number. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Marcus, love, how are you?" His mother's voice sounded tired, but she tried to hide it. "I'm fine, Mum. How's Emma today?" There was a pause that made Marcus's heart skip a beat. "She had a rough night, son. The new treatment is making her quite sick. But, she's a fighter, you know that." Marcus closed his eyes and leaned against the wall. "I can send more money this week. I don't need much here." "Oh, Marcus, you've already given us so much. We can't keep taking everything from you." "You're not taking anything, Mum. I'm giving it. There's a difference." After hanging up, Marcus sat in silence for a moment. The weight of the uniform suddenly felt heavier than usual. He was supposed to be strong, unshakable, a symbol of British resilience. But, right now, he felt like a scared young man who was helpless to save the person who mattered most to him. When he returned to his post, Marcus noticed something different about the guard standing next to him. James Chen had been in the Queen's Guard for 5 years, longer than anyone else in their unit. He was known for his perfect posture and complete focus. Nothing ever seemed to affect him. But, today, there was something in James's eyes that Marcus had never seen before, a depth of sadness that even his professional training couldn't completely hide. The 2 men stood side by side for the next 4 hours without speaking. That was the rule, no talking, no moving, no showing emotion. But, Marcus found himself stealing glances at James when tourists weren't looking. There were small signs that something was wrong, a slight tension in his jaw, the way his breathing seemed a bit too controlled, the barely noticeable way his hands gripped his rifle just a little tighter than usual. During their next break, Marcus found James sitting alone in the guardroom, staring at a letter in his hands. The paper looked official, with a government seal at the top. James's usually perfect composure was cracked, just slightly, but enough for Marcus to notice. "You all right, mate?" Marcus asked quietly, sitting down nearby but not too close. He knew that sometimes people needed space even when they needed company. James looked up, surprised. For a moment, it seemed like he might brush off the question with his usual stoic response. But, something in Marcus's genuine concern seemed to break through his defenses. "My father," James said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's being deported." Marcus felt his heart sink. What happened? James folded the letter carefully, his movements precise even in his distress. "He came here from Hong Kong in the 1980s. Worked every day for 40 years, built a life, raised me and my sister. But, there was an issue with his paperwork decades ago, something he never knew about. Now they're saying his residency was never properly processed." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Here was James, sworn to protect the crown, serve the country, and uphold British values, while the same system was tearing his family apart. "When?" Marcus asked. 2 weeks. James's voice cracked slightly. "He's 73 years old. He doesn't know anyone in Hong Kong anymore. His whole life is here, his grandchildren, his job at the corner shop, everything." Marcus thought about his own family problems. Emma's illness was devastating, but at least they were all together. At least they could face it as a family. He couldn't imagine how it would feel to have the government force his father to leave the country. "Have you tried appealing? Getting a lawyer?" "We've tried everything. Spent our savings on legal fees. The lawyer says there might be a chance, but it would take months, maybe years. And, in the meantime..." James gestured helplessly. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, they could hear the sounds of tourists and traffic, the normal rhythm of London life continuing while their worlds felt like they were falling apart. "It's strange," James said eventually. "We stand out there every day, symbols of tradition and stability. People look at us and see strength. But, underneath this uniform, we're just people dealing with the same problems as everyone else." Marcus nodded. "Sometimes I wonder if the uniform makes it harder. Like we're not allowed to be human." "Exactly." James looked at Marcus with new understanding. "You've got something going on too, haven't you?" Marcus hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about his problems. The military culture emphasized strength and self-reliance. Showing weakness wasn't encouraged. But, something about James's openness made him feel like it might be safe to share. "My sister," Marcus said slowly. "She's got cancer. 16 years old." James's expression softened immediately. "God, I'm sorry. The treatment's expensive. Mum and Dad are working themselves to death trying to pay for it. I send home everything I can, but it never feels like enough." "How long has she been ill?" 3 months. She was supposed to start university next year. Had her whole life planned out. Marcus's voice grew thick with emotion. "Now she spends her days in a hospital bed, and I stand here pretending everything's fine." They were quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of two people who understood each other's pain without needing to explain it. "You know what the worst part is?" Marcus continued. "I joined the Guard because I wanted to serve something bigger than myself. I wanted to be part of something important, something that mattered. But, when your family is falling apart, standing still for hours feels useless." James understood completely. "I used to feel so proud putting on this uniform. It represented everything my father worked for, the chance to be truly British, to belong somewhere. Now it feels like a cruel joke." As their break time ended, both men stood up slowly. In a few minutes, they would return to their posts, assume their positions, and become living statues again. They would stand perfectly still while tourists took pictures and children tried to make them laugh. They would be symbols of strength and tradition. But, now they both knew they weren't alone in their struggles. "Same time tomorrow?" Marcus asked quietly. James nodded. Same time tomorrow. They walked back to their posts together, the weight of their uniforms feeling slightly different now. Marcus took his position next to James, and, for the first time in months, he didn't feel completely isolated in his worry. Next to him stood someone who understood that behind the perfect uniform was a real person with real problems. The afternoon sun beat down on them as they resumed their duties. Tourists continued to gather, cameras clicked, and children giggled. To the outside world, nothing had changed. The guards stood as still and professional as ever. But something fundamental had shifted between Marcus and James. They had seen past the uniforms to the human beings underneath. In a job that demanded they suppress their emotions and personal lives, they had found a way to acknowledge their humanity. As the hours passed, Marcus found himself thinking less about Emma's illness and more about the fact that he now had someone who understood his burden. The worry was still there, the financial stress hadn't disappeared, and his sister was still fighting for her life. But the crushing loneliness that had been weighing him down for months felt a little lighter. James, standing motionless beside him, was having similar thoughts. His father's deportation order was still very real, the legal battle was still uphill, and their family's future remained uncertain. But, for the first time since receiving that letter, he didn't feel like he was facing it completely alone. Neither man moved a muscle or changed expression, but something passed between them, an understanding, a connection, a recognition that they were both human beings doing their best in impossible circumstances. The day shift was nearly over. Soon they would march back to the guardroom, hang up their ceremonial uniforms, and return to their regular lives. Marcus would go back to his small flat and worry about Emma. James would go home and help his father prepare for what might be his final weeks in the country he had called home for 40 years. But tomorrow they would both return, put on their red jackets and tall hats, and stand side by side again. And now they would do it knowing they weren't facing their challenges alone. As the sun began to set over Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the courtyard where they stood, Marcus and James remained perfectly still. To everyone watching, they were just two guards doing their job. But they were also two friends who had found each other in the most unlikely place, behind uniforms that were supposed to hide their humanity but had instead revealed it. The following week brought unexpected challenges for both Marcus and James. Tuesday morning arrived grey and drizzling, typical London weather that seemed to match their moods. As they prepared for duty, Marcus noticed that James looked even more strained than usual. The official letter about his father's deportation had been followed by several more, each one making their situation more urgent and desperate. Meanwhile, Marcus had received a call from his mother the night before. Emma had been rushed back to the hospital after a severe reaction to her latest treatment. The doctors were adjusting her medication, but it meant more time in the hospital and more medical bills that his family couldn't afford. As they took their positions outside the palace, both men felt the weight of their personal crises pressing down on them. The morning tourists began to arrive, but neither guard was really seeing them. Their minds were elsewhere, with family members who needed them in ways that their current duties made impossible. It was during their lunch break that Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He found James sitting alone again, this time staring at his phone with a mixture of hope and desperation on his face. "Any news?" Marcus asked gently. James looked up, his composure cracking slightly. "My sister found a new lawyer. Someone who specializes in immigration cases like Dad's. But the consultation alone costs more than we have left in our savings account." Marcus sat down across from him. "How much?" £500 just to review the case. If he takes it on, it could be thousands more. We've already spent everything on the first lawyer who couldn't help us." Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. £500 was most of what he had saved for Emma's treatment fund. It was money his family desperately needed. But, looking at James, seeing the quiet desperation in his eyes, Marcus knew what he had to do. "I can lend it to you," Marcus said quietly. James looked stunned. "What?" "No, Marcus, I couldn't. You've got your own family to worry about." "That's exactly why I understand how important this is," Marcus replied firmly. "Your dad needs help, and, if there's a chance this lawyer can save him, we have to try. But, your sister, Emma would want me to help. She's always been like that, thinking about others even when she's the one who needs help most." Marcus pulled out his phone to check his bank account. "I've got about £600 saved. It's not much, but it's enough for the consultation." James shook his head. "I can't take your money. Your family needs it. And, your family needs it too." Marcus looked directly at James. "We're in this together now, remember? Yesterday you listened to me talk about Emma, and, it helped more than you know. Let me help you the same way." The conversation was interrupted by David Rodriguez, another guard who had been watching them from across the room. David was newer to the guard, only 8 months in, and, he usually kept to himself. But, something about the intensity of their conversation had caught his attention. "Sorry to interrupt," David said hesitantly. "But, I couldn't help overhearing. Immigration trouble?" James tensed slightly. He wasn't sure how much he wanted to share with someone he barely knew. But, Marcus gave him an encouraging look. "My father's being deported," James said simply. "After 40 years here." David's expression changed immediately. "God, that's awful. My family went through something similar when I was a kid. We're from Mexico originally, and, there was a period where we weren't sure if we'd be able to stay." Both Marcus and James looked at David with new interest. They had known he was from a different background, but, he had never talked much about his family or his past. "What happened?" Marcus asked. David sat down with them, his usual reserved demeanor dropping slightly. "My parents brought me here when I was 5. They did everything by the book, or so they thought. But, there was some paperwork issue that didn't surface until I was 15. Suddenly, we were facing deportation to a country I barely remembered." "How did you resolve it?" James leaned forward, hope flickering in his eyes. "It took 3 years and, a lot of legal help. But, we had community support, our church, neighbors, even some local politicians who got involved. The legal battle was just part of it. The real difference was having people who believed in us and, were willing to stand up for us." James felt a mixture of hope and, frustration. "We don't really have that kind of community support. Dad keeps to himself mostly. Works at his shop, comes home, doesn't make waves. He never wanted to draw attention." "That's exactly the problem," David said gently. "The system works better when you have people advocating for you, making noise, showing that you're part of the community and, that people care if you stay." Marcus had been listening carefully. An idea was forming in his mind, but, he wasn't sure if it was realistic or just wishful thinking. "What if we could be that community support?" Marcus said slowly. Both James and David looked at him questioningly. "I mean, we're members of the Queen's Guard. We serve the Crown. That has to mean something, doesn't it? If we spoke up for James's father, if we showed that even the people sworn to protect Britain believe he belongs here, wouldn't that carry some weight?" James looked skeptical. "We're not supposed to get involved in political issues. Speaking out could get us in serious trouble." "This isn't political," Marcus argued. "This is about justice. About a man who's spent his life contributing to this country being allowed to stay with his family." David nodded thoughtfully. "Marcus might be onto something. When I was younger, what made the difference for my family wasn't just the lawyer. It was the petition our neighbors signed, the letters people wrote, the way our story got out in the local community. People started to see us as neighbors worth fighting for, not just statistics in an immigration case." "But, how would that work?" James asked. We can't exactly start a public campaign while we're on duty. Maybe not while we're on duty, Marcus said, his mind racing with possibilities. But, we're not just guards 24 hours a day. We're also citizens. We have voices outside of our uniforms. David's eyes lit up. I still have contacts from when my family went through this. People who helped us, advocates who know how the system works. Maybe they could help. For the first time since receiving the deportation order, James felt a spark of real hope. Not just hope that they might find the money for a lawyer, but hope that they might not have to face this battle alone. You would really do that for me? James asked quietly. We're brothers in arms, Marcus said simply. That means something. David nodded in agreement. Besides, helping your family helped me understand my own story better. It reminded me why I joined the Guard in the first place, to serve something bigger than myself. Their break time was almost over, but none of them wanted to end this conversation. They had stumbled onto something important, something that went beyond their individual problems. There's something else, Marcus said hesitantly. I've been thinking about Emma, about the medical bills, about how helpless I feel just sending money and hoping it's enough. What do you mean? James asked. What if there are other ways to help? Other resources we haven't thought of? David, when your family was struggling, did you find help you hadn't expected? David thought for a moment. Actually, yes. There were charities we didn't know about, programs designed to help families in crisis. But, we only found them because people in our community knew about them and pointed us in the right direction. Exactly, Marcus said. I've been so focused on trying to solve everything myself that I haven't really looked for other options. James was catching on to Marcus's thinking. You're saying maybe we can help each other in ways that aren't just financial. Right. We all have different backgrounds, different knowledge, different connections. Together we might be able to find solutions that none of us could find alone. As they walked back to their posts, the three men felt something shifting between them. What had started as individual struggles was becoming a shared mission. They were still facing the same problems, Emma's illness, James's father's deportation, and all the financial and emotional stress that came with those situations. But, they were no longer facing them alone. During the afternoon shift, Marcus found himself looking at the tourists differently. Instead of seeing them as distractions from his worry about Emma, he started wondering if any of them might be doctors, or researchers, or people who worked in healthcare. He began to think about the thousands of people who passed by their posts every week, surely some of them had knowledge or connections that could help. James, standing beside him, was having similar thoughts about his father's situation. The diplomats, lawyers, government workers, and international visitors who came to the palace, could any of them offer insight or assistance? David, positioned at a different entrance, was thinking about how his own family's experience might help other people facing similar challenges. He had never talked about his immigration story with his fellow guards, but now he wondered if there were others who could benefit from what he had learned. When their shift ended, the three men met again in the guardroom. The energy between them was different now, still serious because their problems were real, but also charged with possibility. I've been thinking, James said. About what you said regarding community support. There might be ways to build that even if Dad has kept a low profile all these years. What do you mean? Marcus asked. He's been running that corner shop for 15 years. He knows all the regular customers, the families in the neighborhood. They might not know his situation because he's been too proud to talk about it. But, if they knew he was facing deportation, some of them might be willing to help. David nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. People want to help when they understand the situation. The problem is usually that they don't know help is needed. Marcus pulled out a notebook and started writing. Okay, so for your dad's situation, we need to think about legal help, community support, and public advocacy. For Emma's treatment, we need to research additional funding sources, support programs, and, maybe medical advocacy. And, for all of us, David added, we need to figure out how to balance our duties as guards with our responsibilities to our families. It was the beginning of something none of them had expected when they woke up that morning. 3 guards, each carrying private burdens, had discovered that their problems were more manageable when shared. More than that, they had realized that their unique position as Queen's Guards might actually give them tools to help each other in ways they hadn't considered. As they left the palace that evening, each heading to their own homes and their own family crises, they carried with them a new sense of purpose. Tomorrow they would return to their posts, stand motionless for hours, and fulfill their duties to the crown. But they would also be working together on something equally important, taking care of each other. The uniform that had once felt like a burden, forcing them to hide their humanity, was beginning to feel like something different. It was becoming a symbol of the bond they were forming, a reminder that service to something bigger than themselves could include service to each other. 2 weeks had passed since Marcus, James, and David first opened up to each other about their personal struggles. What had started as a moment of shared vulnerability had grown into something much more significant, a brotherhood that extended far beyond their ceremonial duties. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the small cafe where the 3 men sat before their shift. This had become their new routine, meeting for breakfast to plan their day and check in on each other's situations. The cafe owner, Mrs. Patterson, had grown accustomed to seeing the 3 young men in civilian clothes, always speaking in hushed, serious tones. Marcus stirred his tea absently, his mind on the phone call he had received from his mother the night before. Emma's latest round of treatment had been more successful than expected, but the doctors wanted to try an experimental therapy that wasn't covered by the National Health Service. The cost was staggering, £15,000. "You're quiet this morning," James observed, noticing his friend's distraction. Marcus looked up, managing a weak smile. "Emma's doctors want to try a new treatment. It's promising, but..." He paused, unable to finish the sentence. David leaned forward. "But, expensive. Incredibly expensive. More than my parents make in 6 months, even working as hard as they do." James felt his heart sink. Over the past 2 weeks, he had watched Marcus sacrifice everything for his sister's treatment. Marcus had already given him the £500 for the immigration lawyer consultation, money that Marcus desperately needed for his own family. The guilt was eating at James, even though Marcus insisted he had done the right thing. "What about the fundraising ideas we talked about?" David asked. They had spent hours researching charitable organizations, medical funding programs, and community fundraising strategies. Marcus had applied to several medical charities, but the response had been slow, and most had waiting lists that stretched for months. "I've heard back from 2 of the charities," Marcus said. "One said they might be able to help with partial funding in 3 to 4 months. The other said they're only accepting applications for next year." "And Emma can't wait that long," James said quietly. Marcus shook his head. "The doctors think this treatment has the best chance of working, but they want to start within the next month while she's responding well to the current therapy." The weight of the situation settled over their table like a heavy blanket. David had been doing research into medical fundraising, using his free time to learn about crowdfunding platforms and community organizing. But, even with all their research and planning, £15,000 seemed like an impossible mountain to climb. "What about the corner shop plan for your dad?" Marcus asked James, clearly trying to shift focus away from his own problems. "Any progress there?" James's expression brightened slightly. "Actually, yes. David was right about the community support angle. When I finally worked up the courage to tell some of Dad's regular customers about the deportation order, their response was incredible. Over the past week, James had been carefully approaching people who had been shopping at his father's corner shop for years. The response had been overwhelming. Mrs. Johnson, who bought her morning newspaper there every day for a decade, had been shocked to learn that the quiet, kind man who always remembered her grandchildren's names was facing deportation. Mrs. Johnson started a petition, James continued. She's been going door to door in the neighborhood, getting signatures from people who want Dad to stay. She said she never realized how much of a fixture he had become in the community until she thought about him being gone. David smiled. I told you people would surprise you. It gets better, James said, his voice growing excited for the first time in weeks. The local MP has agreed to meet with us next Thursday. Mrs. Johnson apparently knows her from some community council work, and, when she explained Dad's situation, the MP said she'd review the case personally. Marcus felt a genuine surge of happiness for his friend, even in the midst of his own worry. That's incredible, James. The immigration lawyer says having political support could make a real difference in Dad's case. He's more optimistic now than he was 2 weeks ago. David had been listening carefully, and, suddenly, his face lit up with an idea. James, you said the community response has been strong. Overwhelming. The petition already has over 200 signatures, and people keep asking what else they can do to help. What if we could channel some of that community energy toward helping Marcus too? Both Marcus and James looked at David questioningly. Think about it, David continued, his voice growing excited. You've got a community that's already mobilized, already engaged in helping one of their own. People who have gotten to know your father over the years, who care about your family. What if some of those same people would be willing to help with Emma's treatment? Marcus looked uncomfortable. I don't know, David. It feels wrong to take advantage of the support they're giving James's family. It's not taking advantage, James said, suddenly, catching on to David's thinking. It's building on it. These people have already shown they care about doing the right thing. They've already shown they're willing to help when someone they know is in crisis. David nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And, Marcus, you've become part of this community too by helping James. You gave money you needed for your own sister to help James's dad. Don't you think those same people would want to help you if they knew your story? The idea was both appealing and terrifying to Marcus. He had spent his entire life trying to handle his family's problems privately, never asking for help from anyone outside their immediate circle. The thought of explaining Emma's illness to strangers, of asking them for money, made him deeply uncomfortable. I don't know how to do that, Marcus admitted. I've never been good at talking about personal things with people I don't know well. You don't have to do it alone, James said firmly. We'll help you. Just like you helped me. And, we can start small, David added. Maybe just with Mrs. Johnson and a few of the people who have been most supportive of your dad's situation. See how they respond. As they finished breakfast and prepared to head to the palace for their shift, Marcus found himself considering the possibility. The idea of asking for help still made him anxious, but the thought of Emma getting the treatment she needed made it worth considering. Their morning duties passed quietly. The tourist crowds were lighter than usual, giving them more opportunities to think and observe. During their break, David pulled out his phone and showed them something he had been working on. I've been researching medical crowdfunding platforms, he said, pulling up a website. Look at this success story. The screen showed a campaign for a young girl with a rare form of cancer. Her family had raised over £20,000 through online donations and community events. The key seems to be telling the story in a way that helps people connect with the person who needs help, David explained. And having a strong community network to spread the word. Marcus studied the page carefully. The family had posted photos of their daughter, updates on her treatment progress, and heartfelt messages thanking their supporters. It felt very public, very exposed, but also very human. The thing is, Marcus said slowly, Emma would probably love this. She's always been more outgoing than me, more willing to connect with people. She's been feeling so isolated in the hospital. James looked up from the phone screen. Maybe involving her in the process would be good for both of you. Give her something positive to focus on. That afternoon, during their longer break, Marcus made a decision. He called his mother and asked her to put Emma on the phone. Marcus. Emma's voice was weak but cheerful. How's life with the Queen going? Despite everything, Marcus smiled. Emma always managed to make jokes, even from her hospital bed. It's good, Em. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. He explained about James and David, about how they had been helping each other, and about the idea of reaching out to the community for help with her treatment costs. You mean like a GoFundMe page? Emma asked, her voice perking up with interest. Something like that. But, I wanted to make sure you'd be okay with it. It would mean talking about your illness publicly, sharing your story with strangers. Emma was quiet for a moment, thinking. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. Marcus, I've been lying in this hospital bed for months feeling like a burden on everyone. Watching Mum and Dad work themselves to death, knowing you're sending all your money home instead of taking care of yourself. If there's a chance that sharing my story could help, and maybe even help other people in similar situations, then I want to do it. Are you sure? It's a big step. I'm sure. Besides, you said your friends are helping you with this? Yes. Then, I want to meet them. Anyone who's looking out for my big brother is someone I want to know. That evening, Marcus, James, and David met at the hospital. Marcus had been nervous about introducing his friends to Emma, worried that she might be having a bad day or that the meeting might be too overwhelming for her. But, Emma charmed both James and David immediately. Despite being pale and thin from her treatment, her personality shone through. She asked thoughtful questions about their own situations and insisted on hearing the full story of James's father's immigration battle. You know, Emma said after James finished explaining about the deportation order, this might sound crazy, but I think our stories could help each other. What do you mean? David asked. Emma adjusted herself in her hospital bed, her eyes bright with an idea. People respond to stories about family, about people taking care of each other. Marcus helping you with your dad's legal fees while dealing with my illness, that shows something about character, about what really matters. And, James, your dad spending 40 years building a life here, becoming part of a community, that's exactly the kind of story that changes people's minds about immigration. The three men looked at each other, then, back at Emma. You're saying we should tell both stories together? Marcus asked. I'm saying we should tell all the stories together, Emma replied. Including David's family's immigration experience. People need to understand that the guards they see at Buckingham Palace aren't just symbols, they're real people with real families facing real challenges. And, they need to see how you're taking care of each other. James felt a chill of recognition. She's right. People see us as these perfect, untouchable figures. But, if they knew we were human beings who help each other through difficult times, it might make them want to help too. David was nodding slowly. And, it shows that this isn't just about asking for handouts. It's about community, about people supporting each other. Emma smiled, looking more energetic than she had in weeks. Exactly. Now, how do we make this happen? As they spent the next hour planning their approach, Marcus realized something had fundamentally changed. What had started as 3 separate crises was becoming a shared mission that was bigger than any of their individual problems. They weren't just asking for help anymore, they were building something that could help other people too. By the time visiting hours ended, they had the outline of a plan that felt both ambitious and achievable. Emma would write her story, with help from Marcus. James would document his father's 40-year journey in Britain and the community response to his deportation order. David would share his family's immigration experience and how it had shaped his desire to serve his adopted country. Most importantly, they would tell the story of how 3 Queen's Guards had found each other and chosen to face their challenges together. As Marcus hugged his sister goodbye that night, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months, hope that was based on more than just wishful thinking. For the first time, he could see a path forward that didn't require him to carry the entire burden alone. Walking back through London with James and David, Marcus looked up at the city lights and felt grateful for the unexpected turns that had brought these two men into his life. Tomorrow they would put on their uniforms again and stand guard at the palace. But they would also be working together on something that could change everything for their families and possibly for other people facing similar challenges. The red uniform that had once felt like a mask was becoming something different, a symbol of the bond between them and a reminder that sometimes the most important service happens when people choose to take care of each other. 3 months later, Marcus stood at his familiar post outside Buckingham Palace, but everything felt different. The morning sun caught the gold buttons of his red ceremonial jacket just as it always had, and tourists were already gathering with their cameras. But, today, instead of feeling isolated in his worry, he felt connected to something larger than himself. Emma's crowdfunding campaign had exceeded all their expectations. The story of 3 Queen's Guards helping each other through family crises had touched people around the world. The page that Emma had helped write, with contributions from James and David, had raised over £18,000 for her treatment. But, more than that, it had created a community of supporters who had become invested in all their stories. Mrs. Johnson, the woman who had started the petition for James's father, had become the unofficial coordinator of their local support network. She had organized bake sales, charity runs, and community dinners. The corner shop had become a hub of activity, with people stopping by not just to shop but to check on the family and offer help. The experimental treatment had been successful. Emma was in remission, and, while the doctors cautioned that she would need ongoing monitoring, her prognosis was better than anyone had dared to hope. She had started college part-time and had become an advocate for young people facing serious illnesses. The experience had changed her perspective on what she wanted to do with her life. She was now studying social work, inspired by the community response to her family's crisis. James's father's deportation order had been overturned. The combination of legal advocacy, political support, and overwhelming community backing had made the difference. The MP who had reviewed his case had been impressed not just by the legal arguments but by the evidence of how deeply embedded he was in his community. The petition had grown to over 1,000 signatures, and dozens of people had written personal letters describing how James's father had been part of their daily lives for years. But, perhaps more importantly, the experience had transformed James's father himself. For 40 years, he had kept his head down, worked hard, and avoided drawing attention to himself. The deportation crisis had forced him to let his community know who he was and what he meant to them. The response had shown him that he wasn't just tolerated in Britain, he was valued, wanted, and considered an essential part of his neighborhood. David's role in coordinating their community outreach had revealed talents he didn't know he had. He had become skilled at social media management, fundraising, event planning, and public speaking. Several charity organizations had approached him about part-time work, and he was considering transitioning out of the Queen's Guard to work full-time in community organizing. But, the most significant change was in how the 3 men approached their duties as guards. They still maintained the same professional standards, still stood motionless for hours at a time, still represented the dignity and tradition of the Queen's Guard. But, they no longer felt like they had to hide their humanity to do their jobs effectively. During their morning break, the 3 friends sat in their usual spot in the guardroom. The space looked the same, but the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of isolated individuals dealing with private crises, they had become a support network that extended far beyond their own problems. "Did you see Emma's latest blog post?" David asked, scrolling through his phone. Emma had started writing about her experience for a cancer support website. Her posts about maintaining hope during treatment, dealing with family financial stress, and finding community support had gained a significant following. Young people facing similar diagnoses often reached out to her for advice and encouragement. She's amazing, Marcus said, still sometimes amazed by how his sister had transformed her illness into a platform for helping others. I was so focused on trying to fix everything for her that I never realized she might want to be part of the solution. James looked up from a letter he was reading. Speaking of solutions, Dad got another letter from the immigration office yesterday. This time it was to inform him that his case has been used as an example of how community integration should be evaluated in future immigration decisions. Really? David asked, his eyes lighting up. Apparently our campaign created enough attention that it reached some policymakers. They're reviewing how they assess long-term residents who face deportation. Dad's case might help other families in similar situations. Marcus shook his head in wonder. When we first started talking about our problems, I never imagined it could lead to something like that. That's because we were thinking too small, David said. We were focused on our individual crises instead of seeing the bigger picture. It was true. What had started as 3 separate emergencies had evolved into something much larger. Their story had resonated with people because it showed how ordinary individuals could support each other through extraordinary challenges. The response had created a model that other communities were beginning to adopt. Mrs. Patterson, the cafe owner where they had their morning meetings, had started an informal network for families facing medical crises. James's neighborhood had established a support group for immigrants dealing with legal challenges. The hospital where Emma was treated had asked her to help design a peer support program for young patients. As their break time ended and they prepared to return to their posts, Marcus reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. The weight of his uniform felt different now, not lighter exactly, but more meaningful. He was still a symbol of British tradition and values, but now he understood those values in a deeper way. Standing at attention next to James, Marcus watched the familiar parade of tourists and visitors. A young family was posing for pictures, the children giggling as they tried to get the guards to smile. Marcus maintained his professional composure, but internally he felt warm toward these people in a way he never had before. During the campaign for Emma's treatment, people from all over the world had donated. Some had left messages about their own family members who had faced similar illnesses. Others had shared stories about times when strangers had helped them through difficult periods. Marcus had learned that the tourists who came to see the Queen's Guard weren't just looking for photo opportunities, many of them were drawn to the idea of service, tradition, and people coming together around shared values. James, standing beside him, was having similar thoughts. Over the past months, he had received letters and emails from immigrants around Britain who had read about his father's case. Some were facing their own legal challenges and wanted advice. Others simply wanted to share their stories of building new lives in a new country. James had realized that his father's experience wasn't unique. There were thousands of people who had been quietly contributing to their communities for decades, often without recognition or acknowledgement. The afternoon brought a special visitor to the palace. Emma arrived with their parents, part of a group that had been invited to tour the palace in recognition of their fundraising efforts for medical charities. It was the first time she had been well enough to visit Marcus at work, and, seeing her standing in front of the palace, healthy and smiling, filled him with emotions he had to work hard to keep from showing. During the tour, Emma was introduced to several palace officials who had been following their story. One of them mentioned that the Queen herself had been briefed on their community support campaign and had expressed admiration for how they had demonstrated the values of service and mutual care that the Guard was meant to represent. When the tour group reached Marcus's post, Emma couldn't resist trying to make him smile, just like the children did. She made funny faces and told jokes under her breath, but Marcus maintained his professional composure. However, anyone watching closely might have noticed a slight warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. After the tour, Emma joined Marcus, James, and David for their end-of-shift break. Sitting in the guardroom where her brother had first opened up about her illness, she felt the weight of how far they had all come. "You know what I realized today?" Emma said. "When I was sick and Marcus was standing out there every day, I used to think about how unfair it was that he couldn't be with me. I felt guilty that he was trapped in a job that kept him from helping me. The three men listened carefully. Emma had become an important voice in their group, often offering perspectives they hadn't considered. But, now I understand that he was helping me in a different way. By doing his job with integrity, by representing something bigger than himself, by being someone I could be proud of, that was actually part of my healing process. And, when you all started helping each other, it showed me that service doesn't mean being isolated from your personal life. It means finding ways to serve that make your personal life more meaningful. David nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly what I was trying to figure out when I first joined the Guard. I wanted to serve my adopted country, but I wasn't sure how to balance that with staying connected to my family's immigrant experience. And, now? James asked. Now I see that my family's story is part of what I bring to my service. It helps me understand why traditions like the Queen's Guard matter, not because they're perfect or unchanging, but because they represent the idea that people can come together around shared values even when they come from very different backgrounds. As evening approached and their shift officially ended, the four friends prepared to go their separate ways. Marcus would return to his flat, but he would also stop by his parents' house for dinner, something he had started doing regularly now that the financial pressure had eased. James would go home to help his father at the corner shop, which had become busier than ever as people from around the neighborhood made a point of shopping there. David would attend a meeting for a new charity he was helping to establish for families facing immigration challenges. Emma would go back to her own flat near the university, where she was slowly building a new life as a student and advocate. The illness would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her future in the way it once had. As they stood outside the palace gates, still in their red uniforms but off-duty, the three guards looked like exactly what they were, young men who had found a way to be both soldiers and brothers, both symbols of tradition and agents of change. Same time tomorrow? Marcus asked, just as he had months ago when their friendship was just beginning. Same time tomorrow, James and David replied. But, now the words carried a different meaning. They weren't just agreeing to stand next to each other during their shifts. They were committing to continue building something together, a way of serving that honored both their duties and their humanity. Emma hugged each of them goodbye, then looked back at the palace where her brother worked. The building looked the same as it always had, grand, imposing, steeped in centuries of tradition. But, for her, it now represented something additional. It was the place where three young men had learned that behind every uniform is a person with a story, and that sometimes the most important service happens when people choose to take care of each other. As the sun set over London, casting long shadows across the palace courtyard, Marcus, James, and David walked together toward the underground station. Tomorrow they would return, put on their red jackets and tall hats, and stand guard once again. They would represent the dignity and tradition of the Queen's Guard with the same professionalism they always had. But, they would also carry with them the knowledge that they had proven something important, that it's possible to serve something bigger than yourself while still taking care of the people who matter most. That behind every uniform is a human being, and that sometimes the greatest act of service is helping others find their own humanity. Their story had become bigger than any of them had imagined when they first started talking about their problems. It had shown that compassion isn't a weakness in people who serve, it's actually what makes their service meaningful. And it had proven that when people choose to support each other through difficult times, they don't just solve individual problems, they create communities that are stronger and more caring than they were before. The red uniforms they wore represented centuries of British tradition. But, Marcus, James, David, and Emma had added something new to that tradition, the understanding that true service includes taking care of each other, and that the strongest communities are built when people are willing to show their humanity even while fulfilling their duties. As they disappeared into the London evening, three friends who had found each other in the most unlikely place, behind uniforms that were supposed to hide their humanity but had instead revealed it, they carried with them a story that would continue to inspire others long after their own time in the Queen's Guard had ended.